Deadly air crash in Brazil leaves a neighborhood in flames.
It looked like a bomb had gone off.
The black box data is baffling.
Look at engine number 2. The power is all over the place.
I was amazed, because that's just not supposed to happen.
To solve the crash of TAM 402, investigators will need to try something different.
Let's see what we got.
Something that's never been done before.
And it proved to be very revealing.
Oh, no. Don't tell me.
Sao Paulo, Brazil, is the largest city in South America. With 16 million residents, morning rush hour is always a crawl. The traffic overhead is busy too. Residential neighborhoods are packed tight around Congonhas Airport, one of Brazil's busiest hubs. Jorge da Silva and his family live just a stone's throw away from the airport terminal.
My family has always lived in this neighborhood, all of us, even after we grew up and got married. When we left our parents' homes, we bought houses in the surrounding area.
Comprando casas nas imediações.
Every day, more than 500 flights come and go from this airport.
When we were kids, watching a plane go by would give us a feeling of freedom, a desire to fly. Seeing those machines in flight is a fantastic thing.
Então ver aquela máquina voando é uma coisa fantástica.
Today, 89 passengers are getting ready for a short hop from Sao Paulo to Rio de Janeiro. They're flying on TAM Airlines. The Brazilian company has just won an award for Best Regional Carrier and wants everyone to know it.
The number 1 painted on the plane was part of an ad campaign TAM had underway at the time, promoting its business and its aircraft.
No problem, but I should go. I'm on board right now.
Regina Lemos is a Brazilian journalist. She's on her way to Rio to cover a fashion show.
My sister was a standout in her field. She'd been an editor at Marie Claire magazine and was working on the launch of a new magazine. She traveled a lot, covering stories, reporting, interviewing.
Fazendo coberturas, reportagens, entrevistas, né?
Good morning. How are you doing?
Great. One of TAM's most experienced pilots is in command. Jose Antonio Moreno has almost 6,500 flight hours.
Before start checklist?
Yes, Captain. Already done?
Good. Go ahead and call the tower so we can get these engines started.
You got it.
First Officer Ricardo Luis Gomez is less experienced. The 27-year-old has only been qualified to fly the Fokker 100 for 1 week.
Sao Paulo, TAM 402, we're ready to go and requesting engine start.
TAM 402, you're cleared to start.
Fire them up.
Starting number 1. Starting engine 2.
The short-haul jet is powered by twin Rolls-Royce engines.
Yeah, all right, I'll put it away now.
Ronaldo Jenkins is not only Regina's brother, he's also an aviation expert.
It's a short flight, 35 minutes normally, from Sao Paulo to Rio, and you have approximately 5 flights every hour. So it's a very busy route.
TAM
402, you're cleared for takeoff, runway 17 right.
Okay, here we go. Takeoff thrust.
It's 8:26 a.m. Flight 402 is underway.
Well, as we roll down the runway, we typically will accelerate the aircraft to a point that we call V1. That is a decision speed at which the flight crew makes the decision to either reject the takeoff, that is to abort the takeoff, or continue it with the amount of runway remaining.
As they accelerate down the runway, the crew gets a warning.
Hey, this is what? It's out, see? The auto throttle is out.
A single chime warning is really of no consequence during the takeoff roll. At that point, it wasn't something that they would have rejected the takeoff for.
Two more beeps tell them the problem is affecting their other engine as well.
The auto throttle is out. Manual thrust.
They'll have to adjust engine power by hand.
They could certainly continue to take off in the manual mode. Nothing to be alarmed with at that point.
V1, rotate.
It seems like a routine takeoff.
At that moment, the aircraft's climbing, the nose attitude of the aircraft is raising, the aircraft is accelerating, and the altitude is increasing. Those are all good, positive parameters.
No.
Then, less than 50 feet in the air, the plane rolls dangerously right. The captain needs to level the plane fast.
The timing of this could not have been worse. The aircraft is dissipating energy, airspeed, at a rate of about 2 knots per second. Speed is life. So the resolution of this malfunction is super critical in terms of time.
The captain's efforts start to pay off. The wings move back towards level.
What was that?
It's a brief reprieve. The airspeed is dropping dangerously low. Worse, the captain can't keep the plane level.
It has to be an absolutely sick feeling for that flight crew at that point.
Just 25 seconds after takeoff, Flight 402 hits the ground. In an instant, the Jabaquara neighborhood is in ruins. A passenger jet has fallen from the sky. Houses are crushed. Streets are in flames. Emergency crews respond quickly, but there's little hope any of the 95 people on board have survived. There are also expected to be many casualties on the ground. News of the horrific crash spreads quickly.
Meu irmão falou.
My brother phoned me and said, a plane fell in your house. Come quickly.
Venha correndo pra cá.
Jorge da Silva races home, unsure what to expect.
Meu irmão
My brother is a bit of a joker. I didn't believe him at first, but I could hear the fear in his voice.
Expressou o terror.
Jorge's parents are trapped at the center of the disaster. The elderly couple finds their escape route engulfed in fire, blocking their way.
Meu pai disse que olhou para.
My father looked back and saw the room being destroyed. So they rushed downstairs to the ground floor, and he saw flames in front of them.
E ele viu as chamas na frente.
If they don't get out soon, it could be too late. Jorge da Silva arrives home to a scene of devastation. His neighborhood is in flames, and he has no idea if his parents are dead or alive.
My parents! Have you seen them?
It looked like a bomb had gone off. There was fire burning throughout the whole street. Tall flames, lots of smoke, and twisted metal. It was terrible. Like something I'd only ever seen in war movies.
Cenários de guerra.
The plane's jet fuel has ignited an inferno.
There was a river of fire, a line of flames down the middle of the street, burning all the parked cars. It was hard to believe it was real, that it was actually happening.
The De Silvas make a narrow escape out the back of their house. They are later reunited with their family.
It was a very emotional moment that's difficult to describe. In a short time, I went from a sensation of having lost them, that they were dead, to having found them again. That was a rebirth. It was fantastic.
Others are not so lucky. Many of George's neighbors are injured, 4 of them fatally. The crash has also killed all 95 people who were on board the plane.
I got a call from my son saying that he'd seen on TV that Regina, my sister, was on the plane. I knew there were no survivors. That's when I realized she was dead.
Shortly after the disaster, Jenkins is asked to investigate the TAM crash for an insurance company. The death of his sister makes that impossible.
I had to contact the insurance company to say that I just couldn't do the job since I was now emotionally involved in the case.
Across Brazil, the enormity of the disaster sets in. It's the worst air crash in Sao Paulo's history.
This tragedy was a critical event in the history of Brazil. Because it was in a city, especially the biggest city in the country, it affected everyone.
Air crash investigators from the Brazilian Air Force arrive at the crash site. Major Carlos de Conceição leads the team.
When I got there, it was really a scene of total devastation. The plane took down everything in its path. Houses, cars, everything. It was like a war zone.
He immediately realizes the accident could have been even more devastating.
At least the kids were already in school.
Flight 402 has crashed less than 100 meters from an elementary school, where 800 students were attending morning classes.
It was truly surprising that the streets were empty and there were so few victims. For some strange reason, at that moment there weren't many people on the street.
Take your time. We don't want to miss anything.
Recovering all the wreckage will be a lengthy process, but for investigators, it's a crucial step.
First of all, you have to find the pieces of the aircraft. The engines, landing gear, the right wing, the left wing, the tail section. Is the airplane all there? Or did a part come off before the crash? And you start to put together this puzzle.
Então você começa a montar esse quebra-cabeça.
Yeah, that's definitely from the plane.
Esse é grande desafio, porque
it's a big challenge to figure out which parts are really aircraft parts amongst the wreckage of houses, cars, and whatever else.
O que seja.
At the home of Jorge de Silva's parents, the recovery team makes an incredible find. The plane's landing gear has smashed through the roof and crushed the de Silva's bed.
It was a miracle that they survived. The landing gear of the plane, I learned later, weighs about 2 tons. If my parents had been there, they would have been killed.
Piece by piece, all the major components of the plane are found at the crash site.
It's from the cockpit. Okay. Looks like we have the whole plane here.
It's important confirmation that the plane didn't lose any pieces while in the air.
We know that the aircraft departed controlled flight at a very, very low altitude. The first culprit in that type of instance would be loss of thrust.
The Conseso examines the Rolls-Royce power plants at the crash site, looking for signs of engine failure. But damage deep inside both engines tells him they were spinning at high speed when the plane hit the ground.
Burning and turning. These engines were fine.
Ruling out a potential cause is a step in the right direction. But investigators will need more evidence before they can zero in on what brought down Flight 402.
We're gonna head maybe just over there.
Can you keep those people back, please?
Onlookers crowd the Sao Paulo crash site, where 99 people lost their lives. The city has declared 3 days of mourning. Brazil's president pledges a safety review of all city airports. The pressure for answers is enormous.
It was the first time I had ever investigated a crash like this, and it was really very difficult.
Muito difícil.
Okay, so it was definitely rolling right, like this.
Witnesses tell investigators the plane was banking steeply to the right just before the crash.
Anytime you have witness statements that describe the aircraft rolling or pitching or observation of any moving flight control surface, it perks the interest of the investigator.
Shattered wreckage at the Jabaquara crash site confirms the witness statements.
A asa direita ficou cravada em prédio.
The right wing was found stuck in a building. The aircraft sliced into it at an angle, like a knife.
Na faca.
A steep right roll would have caused the wings to lose lift and put the plane into a dive. But why was the plane rolling so steeply? Investigators wonder if there was a problem with the plane's control surfaces, the flaps and slats that pilots extend from the wings during takeoff. If the crew didn't set the flaps properly, it might explain Flight 402's fatal trajectory.
We do know that failure to deploy the flaps or configure the aircraft properly for takeoff has been involved with many, many mishaps.
They focus on the mechanism that moves the flaps in and out. Precise measurements should tell them if the TAM crew made a deadly error. What they find rules out that possibility.
8 degrees, right where it should be.
The plane was configured properly for takeoff.
Okay, mark it down. 8 degrees. This is not helping us.
Investigators will need to look elsewhere.
Yeah. Check the records. I want to know everything the pilots did in the last 24 hours.
How well was a pilot trained? Was he rested? Had he eaten within the last several hours? Everything that makes the man-machine interaction work, we want to find out what went into that machine prior to the mishap.
The records look fine.
A comprehensive review of the crew's records turns up no red flags. The crew was well rested and fully qualified to fly the plane.
A good investigator will take every bit of evidence he can put together and make a puzzle and fit the piece of the puzzle so it fits the scenario rather than the scenario trying to fit the malfunction.
Investigators hope the black boxes will fill in some missing pieces.
This one's in good shape.
The cockpit recorder looks promising, but the flight data recorder, which tracks the operation of aircraft systems, is badly burned.
Let's hope this isn't as bad as it looks.
Não estava com aquela cor laranja.
It was no longer that orange color, which is characteristic of black boxes. It was completely gray from all of the fire damage. I was really anxious to know if the data had survived or not.
As informações ali contidas estavam preservadas ou não.
Okay, come on, I need to get these to the States.
Brazil doesn't have a lab equipped to analyze the damaged recorders, so they need to be sent somewhere that does.
It was a U.S. manufactured flight recorder, so it was obvious to bring the recorder to the United States for analysis.
Dennis Grossi is quickly recruited to the team. He's an investigator with the National Transportation Safety Board.
Thanks for your help with this one.
Of course.
Sure.
Happy to help.
He's also one of the world's leading experts on flight recorders.
Let's see if this all worked like it's supposed to.
But with this recorder, he faces a new challenge. It's a digital device, and in 1996, digital technology is not very common.
We had a long experience with tape recorders, but we had no experience with solid-state recorders. And it was heavily fire damaged, so we thought it was prudent to take it to the manufacturer to use their expertise in opening it and accessing the solid-state memory.
Okay, here we go.
The data inside could be a huge windfall for the investigation.
Nice and easy.
But getting to it is a delicate matter.
There's always that anticipation. Is it going to be destroyed, or is it pristine? You know, what condition is the memory in? You know, are we going to come up empty-handed, or are we going to have a viable piece of evidence here?
Looks promising. Fingers crossed.
The vulnerabilities was the chips breaking. If you crack a chip, it's done. Or if the chips come off the board, then you have to do a chip level recovery, which is very, very difficult.
They hook the card up to a computer and attempt the download.
Does it always take this long?
The data has survived.
Never had a moment's doubt.
The fire protection and the crash impact protection worked. We were very happy at that point.
All of Brazil wants to know why Flight 402 crashed. Somewhere in the downloaded data, investigators may now have the answer. It's been 3 days since TAM Flight 402 crashed on takeoff. Now, with the help of black box data, investigators may soon know why. The flight recorder has captured dozens of parameters about the Fokker 100's short flight.
This specific recorder has 106 parameters, 106 sensors on the aircraft, which give us information. So it's important, very important, to have this initial information in our job.
But will it be enough to tell them why the plane rolled so suddenly out of control? As they study the data, investigators immediately notice something unusual.
Look at engine number 2. The power's all over the place.
The fact that the thrust was increasing and decreasing, increasing, decreasing, and then finally full thrust was very confusing. Why would this happen?
After fluctuating several times, the engine finally reaches full power, the usual setting for takeoff.
It wasn't clear exactly what was causing this. Could it be an automated system that was malfunctioning and causing this to happen? Or was it some crew activity?
Can you bring up all the data on the thrust reversers?
There's another parameter investigators are eager to see.
Okay, so you saw something moving at the back of the engine.
A witness told investigators he saw one of the plane's thrust reversers operating just before the crash. Thrust reversers are buckets deployed on landing to redirect the flow of engine exhaust, pushing it forward to help the plane slow down. Pilots never use them in the air.
Witnesses saw that the buckets opening and closing, and then finally opening.
This was a real surprise to everyone, because the reverser is an aerodynamic brake which is used on landing. Why would it open during takeoff?
If a thrust reverser did somehow deploy in flight, it could easily cause the type of steep right roll that doomed Flight 402. For investigators, witness accounts aren't enough. They need hard evidence. They soon find it in the flight data.
There.
Just after takeoff, the right thrust reverser moves back and forth twice and then stays in the dangerous deployed position.
This shouldn't even be possible.
I was amazed, because that's just not supposed to happen, especially in a critical phase of flight like takeoff.
The thrust reverser system includes a safety feature designed to prevent accidental deployment in the air. The plane's wheels must be firmly on the ground before the buckets will open.
There's a switch called a weight-on-wheel switch that once it was compressed, once the aircraft touched down, would allow the pilots to manually open the thrust reversers. That was by design.
Airlines all over the world fly Fokker airplanes. If there's a design flaw in the reverser system, the lives of thousands of passengers could be in danger.
It's extremely important that the operators know of any malfunctions so they may apply that knowledge to how they're operating their particular fleet. American Airlines, U.S. Airways were big operators of the F-100. It was critical that information was disseminated worldwide to all the operators.
Investigators test the actuators that move the reversers, looking for a failure that might explain why one of them opened during flight. But there's no sign of any malfunction.
The movement of the thrust reversers was a big mystery at first.
They also test the electronics that detect when the plane's wheels are safely on the ground. They need to check every circuit. The exhaustive effort pays off with the discovery of a faulty sensor. It was failing intermittently, signaling the reverser to open and close. The result was chaos in the cockpit.
The sensor failure was intermittent. So, the buckets opened and closed and opened again.
Every time those buckets would open and close, a different yaw moment would be applied to the aircraft. Every one of those yaw moments would have to be countered by the captain. It was very, very involved and very dynamic situation at a very low altitude and very low airspeed environment.
But there's one big problem with what investigators have uncovered. The Fokker 100 has an additional safety net that should have kept the plane safe, even after the sensor failed. If a faulty thrust reverser deploys on takeoff, power to the affected engine is supposed to drop to idle automatically to prevent the reverser from acting as a brake. No alarm sounds in the cockpit, but the safety system kicks in immediately. The pilots don't have to do a thing.
If there is an uncommanded thrust reverser deployment, the systems would automatically retard the thrust level back to idle without any crew involvement.
The Fokker 100 has more than enough power to climb safely on just one engine. So the question remains, Why didn't Flight 402 make it safely away from Congonhas?
Okay, go ahead, please.
The cockpit voice recording may be investigators' only hope of finding the answer.
Okay, here we go.
Takeoff thrust. Green for takeoff.
Investigators listen intently to the sounds captured in the cockpit of Flight 402.
No momento que nós
When we started listening to the tape,
dessa fita,
everything seemed normal during the beginning of the takeoff.
normal. Durante
The equipment, the pilots, everything was as it should be.
os pilotos, tudo dentro da normalidade.
Hey, this is what?
Then, 4 seconds later, the crew gets a warning.
It's out, see? The auto throttle is out.
It's a minor issue. It shouldn't matter.
O comandante Moreno, ele fala calmamente.
Captain Moreno speaks calmly to the co-pilot, who he realized was new to this plane. He calmly tells him that the auto throttle is out and keeps going with the takeoff. Why is he so calm and not doing anything? Because the disconnection of the auto throttle does not impede takeoff.
O autothrottle era item que não impedia a decolagem.
As the plane accelerates down the runway, the pilots seem perfectly in control.
Rotate.
But not long after liftoff, the mood in the cockpit changes dramatically.
No.
He sounds like he's fumbling with something.
It's locked!
What's locked?
Turn it off up there. Auto throttle. Pull here. It's off!
It sounds like the crew thought the problem was the auto throttle.
The pilots don't mention the reverser at all. They're focused on the auto throttle and seem to be struggling with cockpit controls.
Turn it off up there. Here too. It's off! It's off!
There was no alarm to tell them a reverser had deployed.
Those guys had no idea what was going on.
It's clear to investigators that the crew was confused, but they still don't know what the crew was doing in those crucial last seconds.
You want to get clear what in fact happened so that this won't happen again.
To build a more detailed picture, Dennis Grossi tries something new. He combines the flight data with the cockpit recording to create a real-time animation of the flight.
Okay. Takeoff speed was 127 knots.
It's something that, at that point, the NTSB had never done, and it proved to be very revealing.
Let's see what we got.
You can evaluate second by second what happened during the accident, which helps us a lot in recreating the events.
Real do que aconteceu.
The new animation reveals an astounding detail about how the crew reacted when the reverser deployed.
No. It's locked!
Hold it. He must be reacting to the movement of the thrust lever.
No.
The automation just moved it to idle, just like it's supposed to.
The sudden loss of thrust in the right engine indicates that the safety system responded correctly when the reverser deployed.
Turn it off up there. Auto throttle. Pull here. It's off!
But the pilots misinterpret the lever's movement.
Oh no. Don't tell me.
They think it's a malfunction, that a faulty auto throttle is cutting engine power. Tragically, they try to override the system.
I think the first officer is deliberately putting the engine back to full power.
They, in fact, had ended up with the thrust reverser fully open and with full thrust on that engine where the thrust reversers were open.
Turn it off up there. Here too. It's off!
With one engine at full forward power and the other in full reverse, the plane quickly rolls uncontrollably into a fatal dive.
Once he put the engine back to full power, they didn't stand a chance.
The animation helps reveal that the crew's actions played a tragic part in the crash of TAM 402. But it raises new questions as well. Why was the crew so confused about an automated system designed to help save their plane?
There's still a missing piece to this puzzle.
The thought came, why? How did this happen? How did the crew not understand what was happening to them?
Let's see how much time these guys spent training for this.
Dacanseso wants to know how the airline trains its pilots to deal with accidental reverser deployments.
We found out that TAM had consulted with Fokker to find out whether there was any need to train for a reverser deployment during takeoff.
De abertura de reverso na decolagem.
Fokker's response is a key piece of this puzzle.
A failure so rare they decided not to train for it.
Fokker formally responded, saying that training was not necessary, that the probability that the reverser would open during takeoff was very small, and this training was not necessary.
E que não haveria necessidade desse treinamento.
Fokker estimated the chance of such a failure was less than 1 per billion flight hours.
Turn it off up there, auto throttle, pull here. It's off!
The pilot's confusion starts to make sense.
For the crew not to know that the thrust reverser deployment would in fact pull the throttle back, in this case, that lack of training really put the flight crew in a bad situation.
Turn it off up there, here too. Stop! Stop!
Confused and untrained, the first officer restores the full power he thinks they need for takeoff.
Unfortunately, they didn't have enough information to make the right decisions at the right time.
There's another troubling mystery to solve.
What went wrong with this safety system?
That safety system should be foolproof. The first officer should not have been able to overpower the automation and push the thrust lever to full power. Yet somehow he did exactly that. The question is how.
The levers are here.
Investigators trace the components of the safety system, including the cable that pulls the thrust lever back during an accidental deployment. It runs from the thrust lever all the way to the reverser.
It was very important to, in fact, examine the cable. What condition was it in? And to seeing why their throttles behaved the way they did and the thrust behaved the way it did.
This connects to the faulty reverser.
The cable is in good condition, except for one problem. It has come apart at a connection point. It's a baffling discovery. The cable is designed to withstand an overwhelming 632 pounds of force.
I don't see how a pilot could pull that hard. Let's set up a test. There's something I want to try.
Investigators decide to put an identical cable to the test. They pull against the cable from both ends, not only where it connects to the thrust levers, but also from the opposite end, where it attaches to the thrust reverser. They'll soon know exactly how strong the cable system really is. The safety cable system from the Fokker 100 strains as it's pulled apart with more and more force. Then, at over 900 pounds of force, it can take no more.
The cable actually failed at a quick disconnect that was supplied to allow for maintenance, so you could disconnect and reconnect fairly fast. And that actually turned out to be the weak point in the system.
But even with the weak link, the cable withstood more force than the first officer alone could have applied.
Then in terms of design limits, one of the first questions I would have is, how were they exceeded? How did this component actually fail?
Investigators propose an astonishing new hypothesis to explain what happened.
It began with the electrical failure.
A failed sensor disables the lock on the right side thrust reverser. The auto throttle disconnects so that the safety system can assume control of engine power. After takeoff, the reverser deploys.
No.
The safety system pulls back the engine power, but the crew doesn't know what's happening, and there's no cockpit alarm.
Turn it off up there. Gear 2. It's off! It's off!
Three times, the safety system pulls back the power, and 3 times, the first officer puts the engines back to full power.
Investigators conclude that when the thrust lever snaps to idle for the last time, the first officer holds it forward with all his might. It's a natural response.
The object is to get the airplane as high and fast as you possibly can. Given the information that this flight crew had, I would venture to say that 99% of all flight crews would have reacted exactly the same way.
With the throttle held forward, the next time the reverser cycles open, the first officer is pushing while the automation is pulling. The combined force is stronger than the designers ever anticipated. It pulls the cable apart.
You had the thrust reverser buckets fully deployed and full thrust on one engine in reverse and full thrust on the other engine in forward.
The plane rolls violently to the right. The captain fights to level the plane, but his years of experience aren't enough.
Once the cable breaks, the accident is inevitable.
Era irreversível o acidente.
At that point, they had no options. They did everything they humanly could.
Investigators conclude the crash was caused by a rare combination of failures, all of them contributing to an accident that should have been impossible.
The first thing to learn from this investigation is that nothing is fail-safe. We need to have guidelines, information, and training to help pilots respond to an emergency situation, no matter how unlikely that emergency might be.
Embora sejam remotos, mas eles podem acontecer.
After the crash, TAM Airlines added new training to teach its pilots how to respond if a reverser deploys during takeoff. Fokker improved its thrust reverser system. They also modified the cockpit alarm so that pilots will now get a warning if a reverser deploys on takeoff.
An investigation from which nothing is learned has no value. The importance is in learning and improving what we do.
Whenever we investigate accidents, we are always searching to understand why. We want to try and make sure such accidents never happen again.
Prevenir outros acidentes.